The forward air controller was meant to be the person on the scene, either make an interdiction, bad guys, get fighters, get bad guys, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Or bad guys, but there's a lot of anti-aircraft over there, but there's artillery right here. Hey, artillery, get the bad guys. And then I would direct them and then alter the shells until they hit. And the same thing with the Navy. I only had one good Navy story. And it was a ship right off the coast of North Vietnam. And I saw them and I wanted artillery to shoot at anti-aircraft artillery. Nothing pisses them off more than not having an airplane to shoot at. Except for me, which is not so great.
Right.
But that was a Newport News cruiser, and they did a hell of a good job. In those days, there was no global positioning or anything like that. The ship really doesn't know where he is to put an artillery shell on a small target. Right. So Newport News came in. I was telling them that we're going after some anti-aircraft weapons that have been shooting, to protecting the artillery that's shooting at the Marines below the damn scene. And I said, I love to do this, and I'm really happy that you guys are out here, because I don't have to fly in there, and they can't shoot at me. They hardly have anything to shoot at, and we can really work them over. And so we had back and forth. And so I said, okay, we have two facts here. My job is to control the shooting and bombing. My other fact is flying my wing. He's watching me and us to see if anybody's trying to sneak up behind us with our anti-aircraft. So I'm under the gun target line, and he's going to shoot like this. And we shoot white phosphorus so that we can say, go so far beyond or short or left or right or whatever until we get right on it. So the ship comes around, the guns are all pointed, and it's time to go. And so I'm watching, and he says,
and can you see the ship?
I'm right under the gun target line between him and the shore, and wow. He was about a mile offshore. So I was less than half a mile from the ship.
Wow.
And I could see guys on the ship. And so, bam! I don't see anything. What did you do? Was that a real shell or not a white phosphorus? What was it? And he says, that was a white phosphorus. He says, well, I don't know what happened to it, but nowhere is near the target. And he said, okay, we'll do it again. And boom! Okay, there it goes. And of course, I can't see it, it's gone. And I said, same thing. And then my wingman says, Toby, or 252, probably 252, 152. There's something going in the water right below you. And I thought, what? And so I called the ship and I said, I don't know what it is, but there's something going in the water right below me on the gun target line to the target on inland water. I mean, on shore. And he says, okay, hold it. And there was a little longer wait. He says, okay, we're ready for the white phosphorus. Boom! Okay, white phosphorus. And
so those first rounds were short,
yeah,
but close to you.
Yeah, it was so short. But what it was is, and he said that after a short while, he said, yeah, we fixed it. That was the old World War II powder magazine. You know, you put the powder in after the shell and all that kind of stuff. Right. And he said, we just closed that one down. We went to the magazine next to it, and we're ready to go now. So
I see.
I said, you know, you were pretty close to right on. I said, give me max guns, which is everything they can shoot, as much as they can shoot. And sure enough, you know, the whole boom, 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 and the ship is rocking back and forth, and then boom, 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 and I said, "Oh, what a great shot that was! Do it again." And Max guns, there we go. Boom, 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 boom. And I'm really getting excited, goosebumps. I said, hey, I was going to tell him that something went in the water just short of him. And before I could say anything, and something else went in the water just beyond them. Yeah, counter artillery.
From the NVA?
From the shore, from the NVA.
Wow.
And I started to say something, but I didn't have to say anything to them. I was really impressed. The Newport News is a cruise, a pretty big boat.
Right.
It leaped out of the water, dove to the left as it went to the right, and then he's zigzagging and back and forth until he gets out of where the guy can't shoot at him. And of course, once he got moving, the field artillery couldn't move fast enough. But they were right on him. They had him bracketed. The next one would have been right down the smokestack.
Oh, wow.
So I was really excited about shutting down the field artillery shooting at the Marines. I was excited about using a boat, a cruiser, and having them do the work. And I went into Dong Ha below the DMZ, as I did quite often, to talk to the Marines, and they had a naval gunfire latest officer in there. So I stopped and I found him, and I said, "Hey, that was really great job you guys did out there yesterday," or no, it was 2 or 3 days. And I want to check on the boat. How's the boat doing? And he says, "Oh, they're going to be out of action for weeks." And I said, "What?" And he says, "Well, when you go max guns like that and you're firing like that, everything on the boat comes loose. And you have to get out there and tighten everything down and get ready for battle again." I went to Da Nang and flew a few missions out of there. My first FAC mission I flew out of there. And then they moved me over to Hue Citadel, a very small 2,000 feet runway within the old ancient citadel.
This runway was inside the Citadel in Hue.
Yeah.
Wow.
And those walls are big enough
yeah.
to have to walk inside the walls.
Right.
You know how the old walls
Right,
would be.
yeah.
And
Wow, I did not know that there was I did not know there was an airstrip inside the old walls.
oh yeah,
of
that
Hue
was
City.
big deal.
Wow.
So anyway, we stayed down at the compound for the Military Assistance Command Vietnam, and that was where I flew my first combat mission from.
From out of Hue.
Flew out of Hue.
Well, so then that gets to, the question, of course, when we think of Hue, usually it's the Tet Offensive that's in our minds, and you arrive with a few months to go before the Tet Offensive. Right. Yeah. And you're in Hue. Do you remember, what the first sense you had was that something really big was underway as the Tet Offensive is breaking?
Oh, over to Khe Sanh. Yeah, that had to do with, first of all, I had been in Hue, and then they pulled a bunch of us, and we flew for a few months up in North Vietnam, across the DMZ, and then came Khe Sanh. Right. And they had intelligence, I guess. They said, we need to do something. 6,000 Marines, 20,000 bad guys. We actually think they grew it up to 40,000.
Wow.
And that's, 40,000 to 6,000. Whoa. And being stuck in hilltops and in stationary bases in this day and time when you got precision weapons, they can just pick you off at will.
Yeah.
So anyway, the way that went was, I don't remember if it was my absolute first mission, but in January, I was flying up there and they said, we're already engaged. One of our friendly Laotian teams, about 10 miles to the west of Khe Sanh, is under attack. And you need to go out and see what you can do there. It was at night, it was bad weather, which makes it really hard.
And was it across the border or just
Way
to the
over
east
the
of the
border.
way over the border?
Yeah,
Yeah.
near the other border, near the Thai border, I guess it was, yeah. And there was only one other major town beyond that, a place called Chapone, got pretty well known because it was very highly defended. It was a big hub for supplies and stuff. Anyway, I got out there and these other guys are leaving and they told me what they had done, and they had flare ships, but you can't see anything with the flares. The flares are in the clouds and in and out of the clouds, and there's fog on the ground. You can't see much on the ground, and there's a Vietnamese ranger on the ground with the Laotians, and he's talking to us. And he said they were in their command center, and he said that they were under attack by armored vehicles. And then while I was talking to him, he said, make that tanks, they're actually shooting. And he says, we have nothing to save ourselves from that. What can you do? I said, well, where are you on the map? And he told me fairly close. I said, okay, we're gonna go west from there and drop a whole bunch of bombs. And then you tell me from there how far we are from you as a group. And so it was radar bombing. The guys flying straight and level at high altitude, mid altitude, 26,000 maybe. And so he said, Lieutenant Ho it was, he said, okay, and hurry, you know, we're not in good shape here. And apparently they had been getting ready to evacuate anyway because they knew it was hopeless. It was a large North Vietnamese force. And the bombs went in and we got a bunch of bad guys, and we might even have gotten some of the tanks. And he said, you bomb town command post, we're leaving, and we'll go Long Bay down Route 9. So they had a pretty good hike there. So I thought, okay, let me know when you're clear, and we'll just kind of carpet bomb in there. And so they said they had about 2,000 people, including men, women, and children.
These are the Laotians who are evacuating?
The Laotians are going down Route 9, trying to make it to Long Bay, to across the border.
I see, yeah.
Which is, not very far.
Right.
And so I'm flying overhead, and I'm looking down, and the fog is starting to break. And I thought, that's where the command center is, because I'd been out there before when everything was gone. I said, okay, and one of the things I had on the airplane was markers that you can drop from the airplane that are flares, bright flares, long-lasting flares, and it just drops to the ground and it sits there, and then you direct airstrikes or whatever from that. And I had heard some fighters checking in not too far away. I thought, well, they wouldn't be on this frequency if they weren't supposed to come over here. And sure enough, it was a bunch of F-100s. And I checked in with them, and I forget their call sign, but I was directing them toward me, and I said, do you see any smoke out here and all the clouds and everything? He said, yeah, I think I see some. I said, okay, keep coming on this heading, and I'm right over most of that smoke, and I just dropped a bright flare on the ground, and I'm really low on gas, so I'm gonna have to leave. But I want you to come up here, find that flare, and bomb the hell out of it. And maybe we'll get lucky. And oh, by the way, if the bad guys are gonna stay on the road, they gotta go through there.
Now, where you dropped the flare, was that where you thought there might be tanks or
We
things like that?
didn't have any, well, that's part of the story.
Yeah.
We didn't know about the tanks. They talked about tanks, and they're unsophisticated Laotians,
Right.
and they weren't heavily trained. And we thought, well, maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But we assumed that they were there, and then we had to do a lot of it anyway. So I'm headed down toward Long Bay, and they're under the clouds over here, all scurrying along. And a couple other facts from Da Nang show up, and I said, they're on Route 9. There's a whole bunch of people out there, and they're trying to make it to Long Bay. They talked about heavy weapons and tanks attacking their town and the command center. So you have to figure out how you can bomb the road after they're all over it. And in fact, in one case, after they'd already hit a couple of the bridges and things on the road to slow down the North Vietnamese, they got a call from Lieutenant Ho, who saw them shoot a white phosphorus at another bridge that they had to cross. And Lieutenant Ho came up and he says, no, don't shoot, we're not there yet.
Oh, okay.
And so they waited, and they got across, and then they blew it up, and that's the way it went all the way to Vietnam.
When you first heard about the possibility of tanks coming out of Laos, or in Laos, was that the first indication you had that something major was underway in relation to the Tet Offensive?
For me, yeah, but it was a combination of things. You can imagine what 20 to 40,000 troops would look like on a landscape around a small base with 6,000 Marines. They would be here, there, and everywhere. They had artillery all over, and they moved in some anti-aircraft weapons, not the radar guided, but visually sighted 37 millimeter. I had my fun with them. And I thought, yeah, they're not doing this for fun. I mean, all of these forces could be somewhere else, so they're here for a reason.
Concentrated. What are you doing in relation to Khe Sanh and the Tet Offensive? What are the images you have in your mind as you're thinking about that operation at Khe Sanh?
It was fly every day and be there in that area for about 3 hours plus, which is a total of about a 4.5 to 5 hour flight. We would get briefed by our intelligence on the status of everything before we ever fly. We use UHF radios, FM radios, and sometimes even manual signals like wagging your tail or your wings or whatever it took. When we got in the area, talking to the guys on the ground was FM radios, but you had all those radios in the O2, and you talk to all those people when you get there, and when you arrive, you become the battlefield commander. And if the commander on the ground knows exactly what needs to be done, probably you're going to do it unless you know more than he does.
So are you then over Khe Sanh for a couple hours just kind of flying circles around?
No, well,
Khe Sanh,
rarely. The only time I would be flying circles would be until I find bad guys. But usually when I arrived, the people on the various hills, 881, 861, 448, all those hills, they would have targets from the night before. And we would get there and we'd check in with them. The command center in the center of the base we'd check in with them and they'd say, everything's pretty good here. Why don't you go out to the west and do some heavy interdicting on all the main approaches? Or they might say, like the one surprise I had on Hill 64. I went up there, I'm talking with one hilltop, and they said, there's a mortar over on that ridge over there. He was picking away at us last night, really pissed us off, and he hurt a few people. And so, me and some more Skyraiders from the Coral Sea. This is the 8th of February, right after Long Bay, which is when we were looking hard for evidence of tanks that were there for the main assault, because that's what it looked like. Out of Laos, tanks, a lot of troops. Long Bay, tanks, a lot of troops. Then into the base.
Right.
So I was going after I had some fighters, like I said, the A1 Skyraiders. And they came in and we went after the guys up there and blew the hell out of them. And the guys the good guys said, great. And then what?
Right.
The main command post at the base says, Cubby, we had a big battle on a hilltop south of where you are, and we lost contact with them. We don't know what's going on up there. We need you to get down and figure it out for us. And I said, what, you got me shooting mortars on a ridge line that's kind of marginal target if the good guys could get them any other time. And you had these other Marines that were heavily engaged in combat with the bad guys. Anyway, as soon as I turned around, I looked back, I said, yeah, that hilltop over there has got smoke, and there's some tracers, and then I started thinking, well,
Wow.
I feel dumb because I'm over here farting around on this ridge line when there's a lot of troops in contact. The whole hilltop, normal trench line all the way around, is full of North Vietnamese and Americans. And
How close were they?
How
close were they to each other?
How close were they to each other? Hand to hand.
And you saw that? You saw them in hand to hand?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you how that went.
Yeah.
I said, well, we've got the fighters, but we can't just start shooting everything. We need to know what's going on. So I got on the base side. They had provided a little bit of fire support on the base side with recoilless rifles and stuff like that. So I felt, and so the bad guys just moved to the back side of the hill. So they're almost all over there, and that's where they came from anyway, right from Long Bay. And I thought, okay. So I went out on the base side, and of course, Cessna doesn't go very fast. So I got up a little, and I full power just dove like hell toward the ground on the main base side. And then I thought, okay, I guess that's it. And I snapped it up and I went over the top of the hill. And maybe 100 to 200 feet. I mean, I could even have caught a wingtip if I screwed up. And so I'm going over and I'm looking. I only got so many glances in the trenches. So I said, oh man, they really are hand to hand. And of course, no one expected an airplane to go singing over like that at low altitude.
Right.
So I thought, okay, I gotta be careful, I gotta fly. And I went down the back side of the hill and I rolled it out, and then I off through the trees, and I got far enough away, and I finally came up and I said, okay, now what? What did I see? What I saw was lots of troops in the trenches duking it out, hand to hand, and shooting each other, and grenades going off. And I thought, okay. There were quite a few guys in the trenches with helmets and flak vests and stuff on, and others without. And I said, so that's it. This is it. In the trenches and fighting it out. Now, what can we do? And I called the Sky Raiders and I said, go up to the north, come around toward the hill, and there's a ridgeline over here that they had to come over and go down to up to the hill. And I said, that gully in between the ridgeline and up the hill, Hill 84, as far as you dare, scrape the hell out of it. Everything you've got. Put your rockets down in the trees and shoot up the whole place, and just keep doing that, because we know that that's where the bad guys came from, or where they have to go, and if there's any of them left in there, right. And the ones in the trenches, they'll begin to think, it's not going well for us up here, we're gonna get out of here, and they would figure out a way to beat it. Well, in the end came after I left. We had already asked for low, slow-flying airplanes. The A-26 was one that came. They were from Thailand. And this other fag, a good friend of mine, shows up, and I got to go, and as often the case, I'm running low on gas. And so he continues beating up just the way I did. Oh, one of the things me and another guy who had to leave did was we each had 2.5-inch smoke rockets. They were explosive, but they were, when they blew up, it was hot. White phosphorus got sprayed all over the place. Mm-hmm. So I said, well, I can see motion in that valley west of the camp that was overrun. I don't want to leave here with weapons that should have been spent on bad guys. So, bam! I blasted off 14 of those rockets, and then the other guy came in. He did the same thing. So it was 28 of those 2.5-inch rockets went blasting into the trees and brush and all that, where the bad guys came from and where they're trying to escape from. So this other fag kept after it. He got some more low, slow airplanes, like I said. And when he was done, the troops that were on the hilltop got up and walked off.
Wow.
Walked toward the main base. It isn't as though they would walk off the other side where some sniper could take a shot at them.
Right.
And then so they milled around for a while out there, and then the commander of the base said, we can't abandon that hill. We got to go up there and clean it up and take over the hill. And they did, and when they went up there, they found 150 bad guy bodies. Mm. And a lot of them were where we assumed they would be. You know, they weren't all piled in the trench. They were either just coming up or going back to get some more ammo or whatever it was they were doing. And they had all beat it, and they'd been defeated, and we thought, good day for the good guys. There were a lot of casualties, but quite a few were not fatal.
Wow.
And they ended up surviving. One of the things we did instead of circling above is the guys on the ground will say, they're out there in the fog on the southern perimeter of the base. Of course, they're everywhere, but in this case, they're on the southern perimeter. And we need to know what they're doing. Can you just get down low enough in and under the fog and see what's there. And so it was you're talking to me, and I said, sure. So I got going as fast as I could, which is normally you start out as high as you can get, all the throttle you got, and comes zooming down and never fly straight and level, just left and right and up and down and like that. And I went zooming in probably a couple 100 feet. And I started seeing trenches. They're called assault trenches. They come right up to the perimeter where the good guys are, and then they get shallower and shallower and shallower until it gets to the point that the zigzag trenches get to the point where you get a good run to go up that ramp and up into the defensive lines. So that's what they were doing.
Now these are NBA trenches you're talking about.
Yeah, they were out there
Yeah.
in the trenches. And
Wow.
as I flew, I said, oh, those buggers, these trenches they're making are like keyhole. You know, in other words, it's like this, and then before it gets all the way down, it goes out like that, like so that they could hide in there during the day. And so I made a bunch of passes and helped the good guys to draw lines on maps and stuff like that.
So intelligence gathering.
Yeah. You know, my childhood pastor, my mom thought I'd make a good minister. I had a pretty strong Baptist upbringing, and thou shalt not kill was a big part of it. And it was when I was involved in combat, you are pretty much instinctive in following your training to do what you're supposed to do for good reasons. But after the fact, in fact, I even wrote about it in my diary. I think I mentioned it last time we talked. One of our FAC friends was flying really low through a small town just north of the DMZ. The top of the roof came off a hooch and they just blasted them out of the sky. I said, well, we know what to do about that. We've been avoiding these small towns all around through there because we didn't want to hurt anybody that was innocent. And we just started blasting away at them and laying waste to the countryside, you might say. If the people were smart enough to know that it's a war zone and know what's happening and not be there, so much the better. But you had that sneaking instinct that there had to be some people that just didn't have that intuition and that they were there. And we blew up a lot of people. I personally was probably responsible for a few hundred people's death by directing airstrikes and whatever. And then the rest of the story is how many of those were just innocent bystanders. And I haven't found a way to deal with that other than, yeah, there's a difference between murder and killing. Killing is one of the things that people have done all through the history of humanity for various reasons. In the Bible it talks about it. It doesn't make any distinctions about who did it and why they did it. Sometimes they're in the religious leadership would do it, and you'd get rid of all those bad folks over there in that town because they don't believe in the Lord. For me, I never can get past those kind of thoughts. Then I would think, that's why Jesus came. It's not for us. Well, it's not for us to judge. It's that he came so people like us, if we believe in him, will be saved.
Can experience mercy.
Yeah. So, but you can't shake it. It's always there. And
What I'm hearing is, there's a famous book written by a Vietnam vet called "The Things They Carried," and the idea is the book starts out with, you've got soldiers walking, through the jungle or in the boonies, and all the weight that they have, the water and the ammunition and everything. But I'm thinking of that more broadly, the things war veterans carry, the burdens that they carry.
internally, yeah.
Long after the war's over.
Sure.
And that's what's in my mind as I'm listening to you, just that war brings burdens that those who live with it, those who fight it, carry with them to the end.
Yeah, it's a wonder for me, knowing who I was and who I still am. It's a wonder that I could so easily and viciously go after bad guys that killed my friend. Yeah, without a second thought at the time. As many fighters as I can get from the airborne command post, just blow the crap out of that place over there where he was shot at and killed. But only afterwards you think, after we've wiped out several villages and flattened a place, because the bad guys are probably hiding there. And it's probably true, but we don't know. And we think, well, how many folks that don't want anything to do with this war happen to be around where we were bombing and strafing?
Mm-hmm.
But it's after the fact when you can take the time. My instinct all through the war was, like some people say, there's trouble over there, there's shooting, you go toward it, you don't go the other way.